Willow Creek sat nestled in a cradle of rolling hills, a picturesque town where the air always seemed just a little fresher, and the streets hummed with quiet camaraderie. Clapboard houses lined the narrow streets, their pastel colors faded by decades of sunshine, while ancient oaks stood like sentinels, their gnarled branches weaving a canopy over the neighborhood. Life moved at a leisurely pace in Willow Creek, where everyone knew one another and even small acts of kindness rarely went unnoticed. In a modest yellow house on Maple Street lived Jamie, a 12-year-old boy whose curious eyes seemed to take in the entire world. His unruly brown hair often flopped into his face, but his bright smile was never hidden for long. Jamie's family didn't have much. His mother, Clara, worked long shifts at the Silver Spoon Diner, balancing trays and customers' needs with a patience born of necessity. Jamie's father had passed away when Jamie was only 6, leaving behind a hole in their family that they had tried their best to fill with love and resilience. Despite their struggles, Jamie had learned how to make the most of what he had. Over 2 years he had saved every penny he could earn, doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, whether it was mowing Mrs. Carter's lawn, shoveling snow from the Thompsons' driveway, or walking Mr. Pennington's scrappy terrier. Jamie always tucked his earnings into an old coffee can he kept on the windowsill of his tiny bedroom. To him, that coffee can represented more than just savings. It was his dream of freedom, a used bicycle that would carry him faster than his legs ever could, over hills and down dusty roads to the small school on the edge of town. One chilly October morning, the town buzzed with the usual routines. Chimneys puffed lazy streams of smoke into the pale blue sky, and neighbors greeted each other with quick nods and waves. Jamie walked into the kitchen, still groggy from sleep, to find his mother chatting with Mrs. Lewis from across the street. Their hushed voices carried a gravity that made Jamie stop mid-step. He hovered in the doorway, listening intently. "It's his medical bills," Clara said, concern etched into her face. "I heard from Dr. Patel that Edward's not doing well. He can't afford the treatments he needs." "Poor Mr. Grayson," Mrs. Lewis replied, shaking her head. "He's been such a good man to this town. Remember how he donated to fix the community center roof? And now he's struggling alone." Jamie's heart sank. Mr. Grayson was a quiet but kind man who lived 2 houses down. His neatly kept garden was once the pride of the neighborhood, bursting with flowers that seemed to smile back at passers-by. When Jamie was younger, Mr. Grayson would often wave him over to pluck a ripe tomato or share stories about his adventures traveling in his youth. But in recent years, the garden had wilted, and Mr. Grayson rarely came outside. Jamie hadn't known why until now. That evening, Jamie couldn't stop thinking about his neighbor. He sat on his bed, staring at the coffee can on his windowsill. The metal was scratched, and the label had long since faded, but the coins and bills inside represented months of hard work. He had dreamed of buying that bicycle for so long. But now, a different thought began to take root in his mind. Could this money help Mr. Grayson? Jamie tried to push the idea away. His savings weren't much and he was just a kid. What difference could a few crumpled bills and some coins make? But as the night deepened, so did his resolve. Mr. Grayson needed help and Jamie couldn't bear the thought of doing nothing. The next morning, Jamie awoke with determination in his chest. He carefully counted the money in the coffee can, $34.22, and tucked it back inside. It wasn't a fortune, but it was everything he had. Clutching the can tightly, Jamie walked the short distance to Mr. Grayson's house. The air was crisp, and leaves crunched beneath his sneakers as he approached the worn, white front door. Jamie hesitated for a moment before knocking. The sound echoed faintly inside. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened a crack, and Mr. Grayson appeared, leaning heavily on a cane. His once vibrant eyes looked tired, and his frame seemed frailer than Jamie remembered. But his expression softened when he saw Jamie. "Jamie," Mr. Grayson said with a small smile, his voice raspy. "What brings you here, my boy?" Jamie swallowed the lump in his throat and held out the coffee can. "Mr. Grayson, I heard you're not feeling well. This is for you. It's all the money I've saved. I want you to use it for whatever you need." For a long moment Mr. Grayson stared at the boy in disbelief. His weathered hands trembled as he accepted the can. Jamie, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. But I can't take this. You've worked so hard for it. Jamie shook his head firmly. Please, Mr. Grayson. It's not much, but I hope it helps. Tears glistened in Mr. Grayson's eyes as he clutched the can to his chest. Thank you, Jamie, he said quietly. You don't know what this means to me. As Jamie walked home, his heart felt strangely light, even though his dream of a bicycle was gone. He didn't tell his mother about what he had done, afraid she might scold him for giving away his savings. Instead, he carried on with his days as usual, helping with chores and schoolwork, though he couldn't help but worry about Mr. Grayson. The weeks turned into months, and winter descended on Willow Creek with a blanket of snow. Jamie saw Mr. Grayson only occasionally, each time noticing how much frailer the older man seemed. But Mr. Grayson always greeted him with a smile and a warmth that made Jamie feel as though he had done something truly meaningful. One snowy afternoon, Jamie returned home to find a letter waiting for him on the kitchen table. His mother had left for work, and the envelope bore his name in elegant handwriting. Inside was a short note from Mr. Grayson. Dear Jamie. Dear Jamie. Your kindness has lifted my spirits in ways you can't imagine. Thank you for reminding me that the world is still filled with good people. Your gift gave me hope during my darkest days. With gratitude. Edward Grayson. Jamie held the letter to his chest, a small smile spreading across his face. He didn't know it yet, but this single act of kindness was only the beginning of something far greater than he could have imagined. As winter deepened, the town of Willow Creek became a patchwork of snow-covered roofs and icy streets. The trees, now bare, stood silhouetted against the gray sky. Jamie spent his days trudging through the cold to school and helping his mother around the house. His life was a routine of small but necessary tasks, yet his thoughts often wandered to Mr. Grayson. Each time he passed his neighbor's quiet house, his heart ached with worry and hope. One afternoon, on his way home from school, Jamie paused at Mr. Grayson's gate. The once vibrant garden, now tangled with dead vines and brittle weeds, seemed a sad reflection of its owner's fading health. Jamie wanted to knock on the door and check on him but hesitated. What if he was intruding? What if Mr. Grayson didn't want visitors? Jamie sighed and turned toward home. As he walked, he couldn't help but feel the weight of helplessness. Had his small gift really made a difference? A week later, the answer came unexpectedly. Jamie had just returned from shoveling snow at the Thompsons' house when there was a knock at the door. His mother opened it to find a tall man in his 40s, dressed in a tailored coat and scarf. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority but offered a kind smile. Good afternoon, the man said. I'm Robert Grayson, Edward's nephew. Jamie, who had been warming his hands by the radiator, perked up at the name. Mr. Grayson's nephew, he asked, stepping forward. Robert's gaze softened as he looked at Jamie. You must be Jamie, he said. Uncle Edward spoke about you often. He told me what you did for him. Jamie's cheeks turned pink. I just wanted to help, he mumbled. Robert nodded, his expression serious but warm. And you did. You gave him more than just money. You gave him hope and reminded him he wasn't alone. That's something he carried with him until the very end. Jamie's chest tightened. Until the end. Robert placed a hand gently on Jamie's shoulder. Uncle Edward passed away last week. It was peaceful, and I was with him. Before he left, he asked me to come here and thank you in person. He wanted you to know how much you meant to him. Tears welled up in Jamie's eyes, but he blinked them away, nodding solemnly. He was a good man, Jamie said. I'm glad I got to know him. There's more, Robert said, pulling an envelope from his coat pocket. My uncle included you in his will. He said you made an impact on his life, and he wanted to leave something for you in return. Jamie's eyes widened, and he looked to his mother, who seemed equally stunned. In his will, she asked. Jamie barely knew him. Are you sure? Robert smiled gently. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness leave the deepest marks. The envelope contained a short letter written in Mr. Grayson's elegant handwriting. Dear Jamie, when I received your gift, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Your selflessness reminded me that kindness still exists, even in a world that can often feel cold. I've left you something small not because I think you need it, but because I believe you'll use it wisely. Whether it helps you chase a dream, ease your family's burdens, or continue spreading kindness, I trust you'll make the most of it. Thank you for reminding me of the beauty in giving. With gratitude, Edward Grayson. Attached to the letter was a document detailing a modest sum of money left in Jamie's name. It wasn't extravagant, but it was far more than Jamie had ever imagined receiving. Jamie's mother held the letter with trembling hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. You've got a heart of gold, she said, pulling Jamie into a tight embrace. I'm so proud of you. For Jamie, the inheritance was about more than the money. It was a reminder that his actions, however small, could make a real difference. That night, he tucked the letter under his pillow and lay awake, thinking about how best to honor Mr. Grayson's memory. Mick. The following weeks were a whirlwind of decisions. Jamie and his mother agreed to use a portion of the money to pay off overdue bills, easing a burden that had weighed heavily on their small family. At his mother's insistence, Jamie also bought a second-hand bicycle, a practical but thrilling purchase that fulfilled the dream he had given up months ago. But even after these decisions, most of the inheritance remained untouched. Jamie wanted to do something meaningful with it, something that would make Mr. Grayson proud. The answer came one chilly afternoon when Jamie was riding his new bike through the neighborhood. He spotted a group of kids gathered around an old, rusty bicycle with a broken chain. The youngest boy was close to tears as he watched his older brother struggle to fix it. Jamie stopped and offered to help. With a few tools from home and some tinkering, he managed to repair the chain, adjust the wobbly wheel, and pump the tires. The kids' faces lit up with gratitude, and Jamie felt a flicker of inspiration. In the days that followed, more children began showing up at Jamie's garage with their battered bikes, hoping for repairs. Jamie welcomed them all, using the tools he had bought with part of Mr. Grayson's gift. Before long, his makeshift repair shop became a hub of activity, filled with laughter, teamwork, and a sense of community that reminded Jamie of Mr. Grayson's stories about his garden. One evening, as Jamie cleaned grease from his hands, he found himself thinking about Mr. Grayson's legacy. Perhaps his neighbor's final gift wasn't just about the money, it was about planting the seeds of something greater. Jamie's garage workshop had become a gathering place for the neighborhood kids. Rusty chains, flat tires, and squeaky brakes found new life in Jamie's hands, while laughter and stories filled the air. It wasn't just about fixing bikes anymore, it was about creating a sense of belonging, a space where everyone felt welcome. But Jamie's dreams were beginning to grow beyond the small garage. One evening, as he sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, sorting through a pile of mismatched bolts and screws, his mind wandered to Mr. Grayson's garden. He could still picture the rows of vibrant flowers and the hum of bees that used to fill the air. What if I could do more? Jamie murmured to himself. His mother, hearing him from the kitchen, appeared in the doorway. What's on your mind, sweetheart? Jamie hesitated, unsure how to put his thoughts into words. Finally, he said, Mr. Grayson used to make the whole neighborhood brighter, didn't he? With his garden, with how he helped people. I want to do something like that, but bigger. Clara smiled, her eyes softening. You already are, Jamie. But if you have a bigger dream, don't hold back. You'll figure out how to make it happen. The next morning, inspiration struck. Jamie pulled out a notebook, one of his favorite items from Mr. Grayson's inheritance, and began sketching a rough plan. He envisioned a space that combined everything he loved: a workshop for bike repairs, a garden where the neighborhood could come together, and maybe even a little library for kids to read and dream. It felt ambitious, too ambitious, perhaps, but the idea stuck with him. 2 weeks later, Jamie was tightening the bolts on a bike frame when a familiar voice interrupted him. You've got quite the operation here, said Robert Grayson, standing in the garage doorway. Jamie looked up and grinned. Hi, Mr. Grayson, I mean Robert. It's not much, but it keeps me busy. Robert stepped inside, surveying the bustling workshop. Several kids were waiting their turn, chatting and sharing snacks while Jamie worked. Not much? Jamie, this is incredible. Uncle Edward would have been proud. Jamie blushed, ducking his head. I've been thinking about something bigger, he admitted. Something that could help even more people. Bigger, huh? Robert said, raising an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Jamie hesitated, then grabbed his notebook and flipped to the page where he'd sketched his ideas. I was thinking about starting a community center. A place where people can fix bikes, grow a garden, or just hang out. Something like what Mr. Grayson might have done. Robert studied the drawing, a slow smile spreading across his face. You know, he said, my uncle had a similar dream. He used to talk about building a place where kids could learn and grow, where neighbors could come together. He never got the chance to make it happen, but maybe you could. Jamie's heart leapt. You think so? I know so, Robert said firmly. I can help you get started. Uncle Edward left some additional funds for projects like this. He'd want them to go to someone with a vision like yours. Over the next several months, Jamie and Robert worked tirelessly to bring the idea to life. They secured an abandoned lot at the edge of the neighborhood, its overgrown weeds and broken fences a stark contrast to the vibrant space they envisioned. Volunteers from Willow Creek rallied around the project, donating time, supplies, and expertise. Jamie threw himself into the work, learning everything from how to draft grant proposals to how to build raised garden beds. His mother helped coordinate volunteers, while Robert handled permits and finances. Together, they transformed the lot into a thriving hub of activity. The garden was the first to take shape. Children and adults alike planted vegetables, herbs, and flowers, watching with delight as life began to sprout from the soil. Next came the bike repair station, equipped with new tools and benches where Jamie could teach others what he had learned. Finally, a cozy corner was set up with bookshelves and beanbags, creating a space where kids could read and dream. Jamie decided to name the center the Grayson Grove, in honor of the man who had inspired it all. On the day of the grand opening, the entire town of Willow Creek gathered to celebrate. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies donated by local bakers. Jamie stood nervously at the front of the crowd, clutching a piece of paper with his speech scribbled on it. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out at the sea of familiar faces, his mother, Robert, and dozens of neighbors who had become like family, and took a deep breath. This center isn't just about bikes or gardens or books, Jamie began, his voice steady despite his nerves. It's about community. It's about remembering that even small acts of kindness can grow into something amazing. Mr. Grayson believed in this town, and I hope this place can keep that belief alive. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jamie felt a wave of pride and gratitude wash over him. As he looked around, he realized that the Grayson Grove wasn't just a tribute to his neighbor, it was a symbol of what they could achieve together. The Grayson Grove quickly became the heart of Willow Creek. Where there had once been an overgrown, abandoned lot, there was now a vibrant hub of life and activity. The garden bloomed with colorful flowers and vegetables, tended lovingly by neighbors who shared stories as they worked. Children raced around on freshly repaired bicycles, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. Inside the small library corner, kids sat cross-legged on beanbags, their noses buried in books, while volunteers read aloud to the youngest visitors. Jamie, now a local hero in the eyes of many, spent his days repairing bikes, planting seeds, and mentoring the children who flocked to the Grayson Grove. It wasn't just a place to him, it was a mission, a way to continue Mr. Grayson's legacy. But running the center wasn't always easy. The initial excitement of the grand opening had faded, and Jamie realized that maintaining the Grayson Grove would require constant effort. Supplies needed restocking, the garden required care, and there were always more bikes to fix than he had time for. On more than one occasion, Jamie stayed late into the evening, his hands greasy and his muscles aching. One evening, as Jamie cleaned up the workshop, Robert stopped by. He watched Jamie tighten the bolts on an old bike frame, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You've been working yourself pretty hard," Robert said, leaning against the door frame. Jamie shrugged, not looking up. "There's a lot to do." Robert walked over and placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder. "I admire your dedication, but you don't have to do this alone. The Grove is about community, remember. Let people help you." Jamie hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. It's just I want everything to be perfect. Mr. Grayson believed in me, and I don't want to let him down." Robert smiled. "You're not letting anyone down. You're doing exactly what he hoped you would, bringing people together. Trust me, Jamie, that's more important than perfection." Inspired by Robert's words, Jamie began involving more people in the daily operations of the Grayson Grove. He organized gardening clubs, bike repair workshops, and storytelling hours in the library. Parents and teenagers alike volunteered their time, creating a network of support that made the center stronger than ever. One of Jamie's favorite additions was a community potluck night. Once a month, families brought homemade dishes to share, gathering under strings of twinkling lights in the garden. At the first potluck, Jamie stood near the center of the long table, watching as neighbors laughed, swapped recipes, and passed around bowls of warm stew and freshly baked bread. It was during one of these potluck nights that Claire arrived. A middle-aged woman with warm brown eyes and a welcoming smile. Claire introduced herself as a resident of a nearby town. "I heard about the Grayson Grove from a friend," she explained to Jamie as they stood near the garden. "What you've done here is incredible. I'd love to start something similar in my community, but I'm not sure where to begin." Jamie's face lit up. "I'd be happy to help. I can share what worked for us and some of the challenges we faced. We could even visit your town and brainstorm ideas together." Claire beamed. "That would mean so much. Thank you, Jamie." Over the next few weeks, Jamie and Claire exchanged letters, ideas, and plans. Claire visited the Grayson Grove several more times, taking notes and snapping photos to bring back to her town. With Jamie's help, she laid the foundation for her own community space, inspired by the values of kindness and togetherness that Mr. Grayson had embodied. As news of the Grayson Grove spread, other towns began reaching out to Jamie for advice. He found himself fielding letters and phone calls from people eager to replicate the success of the center. Though it was overwhelming at times, Jamie couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. What had started as a small act of kindness had blossomed into something far beyond his imagination. One snowy afternoon, Jamie received an invitation to speak at a regional community conference. The idea of standing in front of an audience terrified him, but Robert and his mother encouraged him to accept. "You've got a story worth sharing," Clara said. "Think of how many more lives you could touch." Jamie took a deep breath and agreed. When the day of the conference arrived, he stood nervously behind the podium, gripping his speech with trembling hands. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw strangers, neighbors, and even Claire, smiling encouragingly from the front row. Jamie cleared his throat and began. "When I was 12 years old, I gave away my savings to help a neighbor in need. At the time, I thought it was a small gesture, but it changed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. That neighbor, Mr. Grayson, taught me the power of kindness and the importance of community. I want to share how his legacy continues to grow." As Jamie spoke, his confidence grew. He shared stories of the Grayson Grove, the friendships it had fostered, and the lessons he had learned along the way. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, and Jamie felt a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond pride. It was the deep satisfaction of knowing he was making a difference. The following spring, Jamie returned to the Grayson Grove after a weekend trip and found a surprise waiting for him. In the center of the garden, the community had planted a tree, a young oak, its leaves just beginning to unfurl. At its base was a plaque that read, "In honor of Edward Grayson, whose kindness planted the seeds of change." Jamie knelt beside the tree, his fingers brushing the engraved letters. He felt a lump in his throat but smiled through the tears that welled in his eyes. Mr. Grayson's spirit, he realized, would always be a part of this place. The oak tree in the center of the garden became a symbol of resilience and growth, much like the community that had nurtured it. As seasons passed, its branches stretched skyward, offering shade to those who rested beneath it. The Grayson Grove continued to thrive, becoming not only a hub of activity but a place where neighbors rediscovered the simple joys of connection. Jamie, now in his late teens, had grown into a confident and resourceful young man. Though he had once felt unsure of how to honor Mr. Grayson's legacy, he now saw that it was alive in every repaired bicycle, every blooming flower, and every smile exchanged in the Grove's library corner. But as Jamie approached his high school graduation, he found himself at a crossroads. He had been offered scholarships to several colleges, thanks in part to the attention the Grayson Grove had brought to his leadership and community involvement. While he was excited about the possibilities, he worried about leaving the Grove behind. One evening, Jamie sat in the garden, the cool spring air brushing his face as he looked out over the vibrant space he had helped create. His mother joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You've been quiet lately," she said, handing him a mug. Jamie shrugged, staring into the steam rising from the tea. "I'm excited about college, but I'm scared too. What happens to the Grove when I leave?" Clara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Jamie, you've built something that's bigger than yourself. The Grove isn't just yours anymore, it belongs to everyone. And just like you've trusted others to help along the way, you can trust them to keep it going." Jamie nodded slowly, her words sinking in. "I guess you're right. It's just hard to let go." "It's not letting go," Clara said with a smile. "It's letting it grow." With his mother's encouragement, Jamie began preparing for his departure. He worked with Robert and a team of volunteers to create a sustainable plan for the Grove's future. Committees were formed to oversee the garden, the bike repair station, and the library. Local businesses pledged support, donating supplies and funds to keep the center running. At the same time, Jamie wrote a detailed guide, drawing on everything he had learned over the years. Titled The Grayson Way, a Guide to Building Community, it included tips on starting small, involving neighbors, and staying true to the values of kindness and connection. He hoped the guide would inspire others to create similar spaces in their own towns. On his final day at the Grayson Grove before leaving for college, the community gathered to celebrate Jamie's contributions. There was laughter, music, and a table laden with food from the monthly potluck. Jamie stood beneath the oak tree, looking out at the crowd, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. When it was time to speak, he took a deep breath and addressed his neighbors. "I've always believed that small acts of kindness can change the world," he began, his voice steady. "Mr. Grayson taught me that. And all of you have shown me how those small acts can grow into something bigger than we ever imagined. The Grove isn't just a place, it's a reminder of what we can achieve when we come together." As he finished, the crowd erupted into applause. Jamie's mother hugged him tightly, her eyes shining with pride. Years later, Jamie returned to Willow Creek for a visit. The Grayson Grove had flourished in his absence, evolving in ways he hadn't expected. The oak tree was taller, its branches sprawling wide, and the garden was more vibrant than ever. The bike repair station now hosted regular workshops, and the library had expanded with shelves of new books donated by the community. Jamie walked through the garden, marveling at how the space had grown. He stopped beneath the oak tree, where a group of children sat in a circle, listening to a volunteer read a story. One of the children looked up and waved at Jamie. "Are you Jamie?" the boy asked, his voice full of curiosity. Jamie nodded, smiling. "That's me. My mom told me about you," the boy said. "She said you started all this." Jamie crouched down to meet the boy's gaze. "I helped start it," he said. "But it's everyone here who keeps it going." The boy grinned and ran back to the circle, where the story continued. As Jamie stood, he felt a familiar sense of peace. Mr. Grayson's legacy was alive in every corner of the Grove, and the seeds of kindness they had planted together were still growing, spreading to places far beyond Willow Creek. Before leaving, Jamie added one final plaque beneath the oak tree. It read, "Dedicated to the power of kindness, which grows stronger with every hand that nurtures it." And so, the legacy continued, carried forward by the hearts of those who believed in the simple yet profound power of compassion,